A Revenant's legends are not merely echoes of the past, but are fully sentient, with opinions and personalities of their own. Activating skills will occasionally trigger in-game dialogue from the legends, and the player character will sometimes respond with race-specific dialogue of their own. Depending on the legend your Revenant has summoned between fights, you may also hear some small talk out of combat. You're free to imagine the extent of conversation between your character and their legendary allies in any way you like. Do they beg Jarlis for tales of his youth? Do they bicker with Malix about the nature of power? Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to do a top 10. Last week in a Q&A I talked a little bit about Raza, this mysterious entity from the mist. Now everyone thought he could be like the original Revenant, and I said yeah, he'd be a cool legend for us to channel as well given these cool theories, but he doesn't make my top 10 list. So naturally everyone asked, what is your top 10 list? That's what I want to talk to you guys about today. This has been a pretty fun little project. Maybe spent too much time on it in the end than I should have. But choosing the various Revenant legends has actually taught me quite a few things about what actually would be a good legend and not. When I first started, for example, I was thinking, oh, you could just pick all these cool, mysterious characters. What about Baltec from the first game? This odd mist traveler who seemed to be hinting at future campaigns and had some big mystery to the universe that we'd unlock if we could only understand him. Why don't we make him one of the legends and then he'll tell us everything? But you got to be kind of careful of that stuff, and I've tried to be very wary of it. You're not going to see me pick a ton of characters here that are just big mysteries as an excuse for us to talk more to them. I don't think necessarily that the Revenant legend system is the way we should get all of our big answers to the universe. So I'm not going to say in this list the gods, for example. I'm not even going to say, you know, people that appeared in the god scriptures who could tell us what it was like to live with the gods, even though that does sound pretty cool. Another character I was really toying with that almost made the list was Cadian. Cadian has this kind of cool connection to the Sylvari and is probably my favorite historical Sylvari character that died in a really annoying, stupid way during Twilight Arbor story mode, and he was the founder of the Nightmare Court. He's got stories to tell, he's got intrigue about him, and yeah, we got a little bit more on him in Living World Season 2 when we had the flashback, but he kind of would have been a cool character too. Now, what I'm looking for more than mysterious characters are characters that are going to interact really well with the player character. Characters that had big personalities, contrasting viewpoints to our own, perhaps so that we can bicker with them or get unique perspectives from them, and specifically badasses, okay? This is the important part. The character had to have been a badass before so that we feel like we'd be a badass channeling them. You know, that's half of the appeal of channeling Malix or Glint or Shiro. These people were powerful and they're interesting to look at too. You know, there's kind of this idea, ArenaNet's third heavy armor profession, a lot of games have got like that Dark Knight, the Death Knight trope, and I do believe that though ArenaNet have kind of de-stressed it, they don't want to look like they're being totally generic with their last heavy armor profession. I think that idea of wanting to feel dangerous and walking the line of morality, as they've explained, is very much a part of the Revenant. So many of the faces you'll see in this list are kind of villainous, even though really we only have two explicit villains from the original lineup, Glint being a bit of an ambiguous one in my opinion. I've also done a couple of other things. Okay, yeah, these are the mists. In theory, a Revenant could channel a hero from the future. I see no reason why they couldn't in lore, but I'm assuming, okay, these are characters from the past. They're characters that are not in the picture or not on Tyria any longer as well. For a long time, I really wanted a Largos, because Largos are just badass, but we know so little about them that it's kind of like ArenaNet would have to introduce a new really cool Largos to us or explain a powerful Largos to us through some means, and then we get to channel them as legend. But at the moment, like, there's none of that going on. Also, I will say, there is a disturbing lack of Norn on this list. I picked a bunch of legends here that would be interesting for a variety of the races. You know, not just humans, but many of the races. And Norn, for a culture that is supposedly so big on honouring past heroes and making legends for themselves, I was very sad to realise about myself. Maybe I'm just not a big fan of the Norn, but I could not, on this list, comfortably put a single Norn that I thought was truly badass and truly awesome to channel. Yeah, we've got some historical Norn, right? And I'm not saying that no Norn have ever done anything really good, but as far as we've actually seen in the franchise and them doing good deeds, it seems really lackluster to me, so I'm kind of sad about that. Last of all, this is more story motivated, just cool characters, I think, rather than trying to fill in mechanical niches. It's not like I'm looking at this and saying, okay, we've got our support spec, we've got our DPS spec, we've got our Condu spec, what else can fit? I'm really not looking at those levels. And And to be honest, we don't even have assurance that Revenants will always get new legends with their elite specializations. They could get elite specializations that change their mechanics completely, like these proposed ritualist changes we've heard about. But, you know, the idea of channeling legends is core to what a Revenant is, so I would hope that their future specializations just means more legends. Alright, all of that said, Jesus, let's get into the top 10. Number 10, Lord Odur. So a lot of people really like the idea of Raza because Raza has this cool stuff going on from the Mist. He was born of the Mists, and presumably he'd be really cool to channel because then he could talk to us a lot about them. His personality to me is a little bit too dry to be a fun character, and Lord Odur, we've never really heard much about his personality at all, but if there's going to be anyone better than Raza from this line of thinking, surely it would be Lord Odur. Lord Odur wasn't born in the Mist. Lord Odur was the first mortal to explore them, to create portals that travel to the Rift being like this split in time and infinity in the center of the Mists. Lord Odur is the earliest explorers of these realms, and if the Revenants are just people who have kind of gone to the Mists and return, you know, hence their name, and are great communers of the Mists, surely the first guy to have explored them would be a fantastic legend for us to channel. Not necessarily a bad guy. We could have great conversations with him about the nature of the Mists and traveling through them, and kind of these inquisitive, deep philosophical conversations. He would certainly be my pick for this angle of legend over Raza, but I do admit he appears at the bottom of the list here because, I mean, we don't really know if this guy was a super badass. We know that he got destroyed by denizens of the Mist for his trespasses eventually, and we know he must have commanded some great power or intelligence to be the first explorer of these places to open up these rifts. But aside from that, you know, we really don't know much about his personality or if he was the total badass that I think a Revenant deserves. Number 9, Kanaxai. A lot of you guys probably won't know who Kanaxai is, but Kanaxai is a demon that was the object of the elite mission taking place in the Jade Sea in Guild Wars 1. So one of the existing Revenant legends we have right now is Malix. Malix was the end boss of an incredibly difficult area at the end of Nightfall. At the end of Factions, you had 2 different bosses you could choose to take on. One in the forest, Urgos, and one under the Jade Sea, Kanaxai. I think Kanaxai is probably a better bet than Urgos for a few reasons. Kanaxai himself was a demon that had somehow slipped into Tyria. It seems very much that when you went deep enough under the Jade and when you got to Kanaxai's lair, it seemed you were kind of very close to the Mist. The realities were blending together, things got really messed up. And he was generally one of these really tense, really exciting, dangerous encounters because he came at the end of such a long mission, had a badass design, really cool weapon skins that he dropped, was a bit lacking on the personality once again, so it doesn't appear super high on the list, but the fact that they picked Malix, I would love to see my favorite end boss, not a giant Marganite monkey, but Kanaxai, a true badass, and with possibly a lot of cool stuff to teach us to boot. Why don't I pick Urgos, the Echo-Vowed Forest equivalent? Well, I think Urgos, there might be some untapped story there about how Urgos is kind of the Echo-Vowed Forest. If it had a pale tree, he could have been their equivalent of the avatar of the pale tree, but was corrupted by Shiro's death whale, and then kind of the wardens followed suit to try and defend Urgos. I don't know, there could be a lot of story there, and that's either a lot of reason for him to become a legend or a lot of reason for him to not. Kanaxai's cooler, I would go with him. Number 8, Churai Osa. So Churai Osa is probably a name you've been hearing recently in recent news because of Stronghold. This is actually going to be one of the champions we get in Stronghold. I don't know whether this means he's less likely to become a legend. I'm just saying he would be a fantastic addition to the Revenant because Churai is definitely in my top 5 of all characters they have ever invented in this franchise. For those of you who don't know about him, this guy was a great hero who saved all of Elona in the past. Elona was being strangled and conquered by a great undead dictator, Palawa Joko, who had swept through Vabi, starved them out by damming their river and stripping them of sustenance. The only areas that remained free of all of Elona were a small pocket in Corner, where Churai Osa alone and a few men resisted Palawa, and he took an elite squad of his best men to slip behind enemy lines and found Palawa and had like this epic climactic battle against Palawa on a bridge, and he ended up saving Elona. This isn't why he's such a cool character though. Yes, this proves he's a badass, yes, this proves he's got stories to tell, but the best part of his plot comes after, when having rebuilt Elona, having put himself into a position of power, he craves for more, and he comes to learn of Ascension, the idea that he and his people can become more, can become closer to the gods, leads them on a foolish pilgrimage away from the lands of Elona into the desolation and the inhospitable Crystal Desert, and gets himself and all of his people who were loyal enough to follow him killed. So he was this great hero, and then he makes this great mistake and is responsible for the lives of thousands and the defeat of his new nation of Elonia. So then we meet him in Guild Wars 1. He becomes the ghostly hero. He is a prominent NPC at that point for some of the PvP we used to take. He used to go to the Hall of Heroes. He has got a lot of stories to tell, and he's a flawed, interesting character. One of the best ArenaNet have ever made. I think he deserves to be a Revenant legend for that alone. Not even thinking about the fact, if we ever get an expansion that takes us to Elona, where we will fight Palawa Joko, who is at large once again, wouldn't it be great to have Churai Osa riding shotgun with him to quip about it as we do so? Ah, that would just be brilliant. Number 7, Kunang. Kunang is a pretty obvious pick, only because we already have Glint. While Prophecies, the original release of Guild Wars 1, introduced us to a prophetic dragon, Glint, its sequel of sorts, Factions, the Factions campaign, introduced to us another powerful, mysterious dragon who had been corrupted by Shiro Togachi. This was Kunang, the great salt spray dragon, and is still subject of much speculation from people as having some potential association with one of the other Elder Dragons, namely, the top contender would be Steve, the Deep Sea Dragon. So Kunang just seems to fit. We're getting Glint as an elite specialization. Surely Kunang, also incredibly powerful, also an incredible focus of its respective campaign, also deserves to become one. If eventually Guild Wars does move us back to Cantha, I can think of no more fitting legend than Kunang for the Revenants. You could even have kind of a mechanical setup where Glint does some specific mechanical stuff, and Kunang is kind of Glint's perfect complementary set or altering set, and then the cruel thing for the players that's going to suck is that obviously you can only channel one at once. That could be really, really fun. Like, those two dragons together, I'd love it. Number 6, Blimm. I'm fairly confident a lot of you guys won't know who Blimm is, but Blimm I think could be a really interesting Revenant legend for us for several reasons. Many of the people who have already appeared on this list are badasses, sure, have got prominent positions in the story, sure, but what about their personalities? Maybe they're just kind of generic, evilly sounding guys, maybe their personalities are quite dry. Blimm has a brilliant, rich personality, and specifically, he's even got a lot of comic relief to him. Blimm was one of my favourite Asura characters. He's very downtrodden, always being kind of snarled at by his superiors, and generally seen as incompetent. Here's some quotes for you guys. There's a real comic relief angle to him. Uda's lab is in shambles, he says. Now's my chance to show her my ability to take up the slack. Or set myself on fire using her tools. Either way, she'll be impressed. He was deranged. He'd say stuff like, I could put poison in the green plant dip. He was actually based off of a character from Office Space, if you guys have seen that. His kind of instability and quirkiness, they come from the character Milton Wadhams. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's fantastic. But basically, he's got a rich character, a rich personality, and I think even though, by and large, the Revenant can have these, dark, twisted, morally ambiguous legends that he's invoking, I think there is space for some really interesting dialogue and fun stuff with someone like Blimm. There's another reason I like Blimm too, though. Blimm, in the end, despite all of this, went on to be renowned as one of the world's greatest Golomancers. The Asura of today have a great deal of respect for Blimm and the advances he made in the field of necromancy and Golomancy specifically. So I like the idea of playing as an Asura character, invoking Blimm, and really being able to connect with him, or expecting him to be like this great guy, and then being totally thrown aback by the way he truly acts. Even better than that, Blimm was closely associated with, for many years, with Zin. Zin being another historical Asuran character that is under wide speculation. I've discussed this in a video fairly recently, that he could be the original founder of the Inquest and may even still have a role to play in the story as it still stands. So I wouldn't dare say Zin should be a Revenant legend, but Blimm's pretty much perfect. He covers all the bases. Number 5, and now we're getting into some good ones. How about Tybalt? Now, this is going to be a bit of a controversial pick, but consider this, that we could, as Revenants, invoke some of our past really likable characters that unfortunately died. I say Tybalt specifically because he was my favourite character who dies during the personal story, but of course there are the other two also. For what it's worth, I think that this pick is a very low chance to actually happen, for two reasons really. I don't think they're going to want to pick Tybalt when there are two other identical characters and you'll have that rare player out there who actually preferred the other ones because they picked a different order. And more specifically as well, I think ArenaNet can view this part of the story as this great sad moment that we're all devastated by, and to bring them back, this would almost be like bringing them back to life in a weird way, and maybe they'd feel like this invalidates that. Personally, I think that just because of how copy-pasted those character arcs were, how little time we got to spend with these characters, it really wasn't that sad in the first place, and I just love more opportunity to interact with these characters. But Tybalt was a fantastic character. We already knew captured the hearts of many of our players, could be considered a bit of a badass. Who wouldn't love to run around as a Revenant and have someone talking about selling apples in their ear once again? It'd be pretty nice. Number 4, Mhenlo. Now, for this pick, I'm really talking about a group of characters. In GW1, for those of you who never played, it was a party-based game. You would rarely solo content. You would play with other people, but if there weren't other people available, you would have AI characters wandering around with you, and specifically, throughout all 3 of the major campaigns and Eye of the North, the expansion, there was an adventuring party, a bit like the Guild Wars 1's version of Destiny's Edge, who would travel with you and were often available for hire throughout the various missions. This adventuring party consists of Mhenlo the Monk, Sin the Elementalist, Eve the Necromancer, Aiden the Ranger, and Devonna the Warrior. All of them, because they were so thickly involved in the Guild Wars 1 story, ended up developing strong personalities of their own. Sin and Mhenlo, for example, ended up being in a relationship together, and while mechanically they may not have the stories and the fact that these characters were prevalent throughout all those major events 250 years ago, I think qualifies them enough to be seen with some fondness. Specifically, this could be nostalgia speaking, but I love the idea of being able to walk around with any of these characters once again. However, I did choose Mhenlo specifically of the lot of them, because I feel like Mhenlo, even though Devona was kind of their leader, I feel like Mhenlo was probably the biggest character of them all. He took a really prominent role, specifically in factions at the end of the story. Once Master Togo had been killed and you were fighting Shiro, who was the last guy at your side? It was Mhenlo. Togo and Mhenlo were great friends, and there was this big rivalry between Mhenlo and Shiro too. And think about this, as a Revenant, you could choose to invoke both Shiro and Mhenlo as your chosen legends, and I love the thought that these two are kind of being forced into the same vessel, bound to your will. Speaking of Togo, he's probably, I would say, the general fan favorite in the whole community for people looking at new Revenant legends for invoking. Togo himself was a ritualist. Revenants are very ritualistic and seem to borrow a lot of their ideas, and he was just a friggin' awesome character. He had that skill, Rage of the Dragon Empire, before the whole data mining of Shiro and Glint thing. It really seemed like Togo was one of the biggest contenders, but I have a fonder spot for his dear student Mhenlo. You can even look a little bit further as well than these main characters. There were, of course, a lot of other henchmen. I think I should probably mention characters like Talon Silverwing. The idea of invoking a Tengu legend would be really friggin' sweet, but I think only one from this category can really fit, so it's not too much fan service, just back to the first game all the time, and Mhenlo, I think, is most deserving of them all. Number 3. The alternate reality Asuran player character. So this is the weirdest one on the list, but hear me out, okay? I like the idea of different legends having different prominence to different characters. And again with the Asura idea, we hear during the Asuran personal story that there is indeed an alternate version of you who becomes a tyrannical leader at one point. There is a huge fight in Divinity's Reach. There is heavy involvement from the Steam Golems. One of my biggest theory videos I ever did was early Season 1 Living World stuff, where I thought the Living World was going to tie into this story. For all of that mystery, for all of that intrigue, it is, in theory, possible that we could invoke this legend from the mists, from the multiverse, alternate timelines, and how amazing, then, would it be to invoke what is essentially you, just a deranged alternate version of you. I get it, it's pretty Asuran-centric. If you're a Norn, a lot of that joy is going to be lost on you, but oh my god, I think that is a very fun idea, no matter how unlikely. Moving on to some likely ones for the last two, though. Number 2, Rurick. Rurick, I actually think, of everything I'm about to say on this list, is the most likely legend we will eventually be able to channel. So Prince Rurick, those of you guys who never played the first game, was the prince and the primary character, really, of early Prophecy story. The son of King Adalbern. He saw the war with the Char for what it was after the searing was called down on that nation, and Adalbern, in his stubbornness, refused aid from the Crichtons over the mountains. Prince Rurick decided to flee. He decided to take what people were loyal to him, after being exiled by his father, he tried to lead them to Kryta. There's a lot of cool story about Rurick. He had a lot of voice acting. A lot of people, despite the fact that mechanically in game he'd always run ahead and get himself killed and then get people kicked out of missions, I think we all have a fondness for this tragic character. Rurick ended up dying en route to Kryta, and that kind of is the first time ArenaNet ever really demonstrated they could kind of tell a story, because people were like, whoa, I didn't expect him to die, only to appear once again at the end of the story at the Fire Island chain. Now, here's why I think he's incredibly likely to be a part of the story. There is a theory out there, and one I think is absolutely phenomenal, to do with Rytlock Brimstone specifically. Now that he's a Revenant, Rytlock would have great cause to channel Rurick. Maybe it will only happen in the plot. Maybe we as players won't get to invoke Rurick. But why would Rytlock want to do this? Well, Rytlock was captured into the mist initially because he was trying to end the foe fire. He was trying to stop the ghosts, and he attempted to perform a ritual that was only supposed to be performed by one of royal blood. For this, his sword was lost to him, Rurick's original sword, Sahothin. He dived down to find it, and so now that Rytlock is a Revenant, perhaps he can channel Rurick and try this ritual once again with Rurick by his side and finally cease the foe fire. This could be something that happens in Heart of Thorns, and if that's going to be a big part of the story of Rytlock, maybe one day we could get Rurick as a legend too. And this leads me handily, because it's the same kind of story, onto number 1, Bonfaaz Burnt Fur. So Bonfaaz Burnt Fur is a char from GW1, a char revolving around the searing of Ascalon. Bonfaaz was the leader of the Flame Legion, who at that time had a great deal of power, and it was under Bonfaaz's command that the Char used the Cauldron of Cataclysm, found the devastating magic to break through the Great Northern Wall. It was under Bonfaaz Burnt Fur's military knowledge that the Char managed to take advantage of the Cauldron and the chaos it had sowed throughout Ascalon, and managed to push into their territory, ultimately winning Ascalon back for the Char after a long period of time. Bonfaaz Burnt Fur, Flame Legion or not, is probably the best example of a powerful military Char leader we've had. And as a player of the first game, you encountered him a variety of times through those early game missions, eventually killing him in the last Ascalon mission at the ruins of Rin. Bonfaaz was a badass, and what I specifically like about the idea of him as a Revenant legend is there are so many angles across a variety of races and even classes for him to interact with you in interesting ways. Think of the interactions between you and him if you're a Char Revenant. Do you like Bonfaaz because he ultimately won Ascalon back for you, or do you hate him because you've been conditioned to hate the Flame Legion at this point? Do you cower in his presence because he was such a powerful Char and perhaps you've not reached heights like his? Or do you kind of slap him down and diminish his achievements? Think about it playing as a human. You're probably going to hate Bonfaaz as a human, perhaps a bit more one-dimensional, but again, these are paths to interesting dialogue. Something even better that I was thinking about is Bonfaaz was defeated at the hands, yes, of the humans, but specifically Prince Rurick and Stormcaller. Stormcaller was blown, bringing in a rain that weakened the Flame Legion's magics and ultimately allowed us to kill him. And what are we getting with Heart of Thorns? For Elementalists at the very least, we're getting the Tempest. The Tempest, which very likely will be a storm-based profession, wielding a Warhorn, just like Stormcaller maybe was. So you're going to be able to play as a Revenant in an environment where there are a bunch of Tempests around you and Elementalists conjuring the same kind of magic that once was his downfall. That's an exciting thought to me. So there you go, guys. That's my top 10. Don't get me wrong. I don't think we're going to have as elaborate interactions between our legends and ourselves as I've made out here. These are just kind of the possibilities laid bare. I don't think ArenaNet will show so much favoritism to just one class that would get all this extra dialogue. But these are cool little avenues. These are pretty badass characters. These are some cool legends. Thought I'd share it with you guys. Let me know if you have any favorite legends you thought would be on this list and I didn't pick. And we'll have some discussion about it in the comments. Thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.